Good afternoon, Professor York here. We're going to be talking about today scoping and a concept called FOD, or framing, setting objectives, and deliverables, which are part of the scoping process. And so this is essential for being able to really establish a proper path and direction for client engagement, but the skill sets can be used within an organization in terms of managing expectations with management, as well as with subordinates, as well as with peers, as well as even in personal life with family. So this is a video version of this lecture that I had talked about with class last quarter, but will make for a good refresher. So I think the point here is that the problem with most consulting projects is they're all over the place. And if you have a good frame, objective, deliverable, so good scope, you can focus and you can be much more effective here. A lot of consultants will end up trying to do everything that the client wants, and what happens is they don't end up being as successful, or they're less efficient, and at the end of the day is they may lose money as well as not fully satisfying the client. So what's on our agenda is we are going to talk about scope in terms of what the project entails, which it really involves these three concepts of framing, which is what is the primary problem, or the situation we're dealing with, and it drives the overarching problem question, the objectives, what we're trying to accomplish, and then the deliverables that are really the type of deliverables, the hard items that will come out of the consulting project that you will produce. And the reason for tight scope is critical is just to be on target with client needs, and not just to be on target with those needs, but to deliver successfully. You hear routinely about biting off more than can chew. I actually had a student this last quarter who took on more for a project with the Paso Robles Chamber of Commerce, and at the end of the day he provided a vast array of deliverables, but the client was disappointed because of the quality of the deliverables that were there. So, you really need to manage, and that's why I'm very important about, rather than doing these 10 things, what are the top 2 or 3? And this should be a part of your questioning of clients. What are the top 2 or 3 things that must be done that will define success? And remember, a client wants Lamborghini and has the budget more for a Fiat, okay? And this is what you realistically can deliver. So this is why a narrow and a tight scope is so critical. In fact, Phil Powell, who is one of the deans over at Kelley School of Business, points this out, that scoping is probably one of the most challenging and difficult parts of an engagement, but is the most critical part because it really defines in terms of what you really need to do and the expectations to meet over a certain time frame, which really gets into really the next 3 points about a scope, which is scope really balances out with costs and time. You have a broader scope, that means it's going to cost more time or money, and that's part of the negotiations with clients. Some will add in their quality to the quality of product that is there. And that definition can be in terms of how rigorous that product is to how complete that product is. That could be a fourth component, but the big point that really we want to say everybody's going to get a quality product, but it's really the scope is going to trade off in terms of the time and cost issues. And why I didn't, so I had a situation exercise with a group where I didn't clearly define the scope. I did it deliberately not clear, and they said it was like being in a snowstorm. And was that understanding of being in a whiteout to understand how clarity with projects can lead to success. Because if you don't have that clarity, you will feel like you're in this whiteout, and it can make for a very frustrating project. So let's talk about F for the FOD, which is frame. So let's look at an example with a few tips. So here, which would you choose? So I have frozen yogurt 20% fat or 80% fat free. And this is from Tversky and Kahneman, who've done a lot of psychological research, and this is from their key paper. And of course, we all would choose the frozen yogurt fat-free, but they're the same product, but it's just how we tee it up, and that's very important in that frame we do that. Here's a brief framing of a project that we did with Ageley Moffitt Cancer Center, where they wanted the pipeline, what it would look like in 7 years. So actually a very, very broad scope, and could easily, we could have boiled the ocean and spent a whole day with a symposium looking at this. We flipped it back and redefined it in terms of business terms with a question as to what should Moffitt do to position its research and operations with respect to the future oncology pipeline to create competitive advantage. And so in many ways, that example there points out, are we solving the right problems? And so the discussions that you should have with your clients are to really identify what is the problem and what's the job to do. And this is what a good entrepreneur actually does as well, is really identifying what the customer's need is and what is the right problem, the big priority problem that's there. Okay, so here's an example. This is, could we reframe this problem here? So this is a classic from Weddell Waddelsberg, Harvard Business Review paper, where in essence the first example he gave was an elevator, and an elevator that was moving slow in an old building. And the initial problem was the elevator's too slow, and the knee-jerk solution is make it faster by spending money and installing a new lift, upgrading the motor, improving the algorithm. And in many ways, this is what managers look to. Give me solutions, don't give me problems. But before you can have a proper solution, you almost really need to know, are you asking the right question? So really, when you think about this situation with the elevator, is it that it was too slow, or was it the question about that the wait is annoying? Okay, so now we have what we call a classic queuing problem. So if we know that, then what we can do is take some lessons from what we see in restaurants like Benihana, where basically we can make the wait feel shorter. Okay, put up mirror, play music, hand sanitize, things to occupy your time. Very successful restaurants do this by, when they engage you and there is a wait, they will move you over to the bar. They'll get you a drink, maybe an appetizer. They'll give you maybe the menu to look at, so that by the time those things happen, what happens is that wait feels less. They'll even do that when they bring you to the table, and next thing you know, they'll say, "Can I get a drink order?" And bring some bread or something like that. Now to make that wait to the main course a little bit feel a little less extensive. So it's just managing that wait annoying problem that in this case save a lot of money by doing this solution set versus having to go and install new hardware or software. So a good frame has an overarching question. I think this is a very, very important piece that I want to highlight here. And when you do your frame, you should be able to end up with the end of your frame really defining what the arching question is. So I've given some examples. I'm not going to belabor it, but these are things to think about. Should I go into this market or not? Is it worthwhile to build or buy? Should I pursue an audience? What's the competitive mix? What would be the firm's competitive advantage, channel strategy? What are the personas of the customers? How would we engage with them? And what media would we use? What would be initial test case? Sales or office, a classic. Build a go-to-market plan. What would effective social media plan look like? What would a campaign look like? And how would I measure success? What's the root cause of problem X and how should the company address? And what are the best practices? So these are questions that help you define a hypothesis, but also build the basis for your objectives and ultimately your deliverables. They actually tie in very nicely to As you remember in a previous video, I talked about SCQR, situation, complication, question. So the key question here that we have to address should tie into this overarching question. The recommendations should be able to come into tying into the question, and ultimately having your 3 data points or your 3 argument points should be able to address the question, or be able to effectively help you do and focus your research and tell your story. So what about objectives? All right, so these objectives, okay, are very specifically action-oriented statements. Okay, so to do this, explore that, identify that. And they define specifically what to do, and they should be SMART. And I think you all are familiar with specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based objectives that are there. And then there's those deliverable, and why are they the dollar piece? Okay, because these are things that at the end of the day, this is what the customer's actually paying for. Are those things called the deliverables, okay? And those deliverables can be your research data in a report or in a PowerPoint, a marketing plan. It could be a branding profile. It could be a marketing campaign. So these are the hard deliverables that in essence people or your clients would be paying for in terms of your work product. But to have that proper, you need to understand what your objectives are. So here's an example of work product that people will pay for. So you have certain set milestones. You're building a house. This happens in terms of with a variety of projects. You may have set milestones that occur which trigger payment. I do this in my business. A milestone may be a kickoff. It may be deliverable of a first draft, or it may be work that has been done, research been done before a meeting, and then the final closure meeting. In the house example, it's the permits. It's the starting the building process and then moving into the house. Those are milestones, and the deliverables will end up being the outputs that we want, and this is what we are paying for. So that gives you a sense of milestones. Here's another example. It comes from my practice where I have some objectives and I have a very specific scope of work. This was relative to market research I was doing for opioid abuse and pruritus, or atopic dermatitis therapeutics market, in terms of identifying what was the ideal indication. And so as you see, I define what my work is going to be, and my reports that are going to be a presentation, and also is going to be a summary PowerPoint. Here is a second example again where the objective is to tell 2 manuscripts that are helping to address some preclinical studies of a particular product, and here's the work that would be done, and then the deliverables being 2 manuscripts, and 2 manuscripts that are just written, not submitted. And if you notice that I put in there 2 rounds of review, I do that because there's a dollar figure relative to in writing or doing stuff that, in essence, if a client feels like they want to add on, then you have leeway for negotiation for variances. So bottom line here in scoping is, and this is very critical, is make sure you have a frame. That frame is to define the background around the problem or the situation complication, but the core question or that overarching question, and that should help drive your objective ultimately in terms of those action-oriented, they're SMART-oriented objectives, and then deliverables, which are the hard pieces that you define. So I'll be expecting from your initial engagements that you'll come back with a scope document, and that'll be something only the client will sign off on. It'll be part of your first presentation that we're going to do actually at week 3 instead of week 2, to give you enough time to, 1, get with your client, and 2, be able to put together a nice presentation that's there. So hopefully by using this framework, you'll translate to project success. Anyway, if you have any questions, as always, feel free to email me, catch me during office hours or during class.